So to that end, how would a content provider like McGraw-Hill Education, what are some things we should be thinking about when we are trying to optimize and create content for every learner, knowing the challenges that we are expected to try and educate as many as we can?
Yeah.
And so what are some things that we should think about and employ from a research perspective when we are actively thinking about academic design and meeting the needs of such diverse, not only learners, but geographical areas, levels of interest? What are some things that we should think about?
Here are two things that I would encourage you to do. I think I have fewer specific answers for these as sort of strategies for thinking about these kinds of challenges. One is you probably in all kinds of ways are evaluating whether the things that you're creating benefit learners in the aggregate. And I would really encourage you to think about efficacy not just in terms of how it benefits learners in the aggregate, but how it benefits the most vulnerable learners in the system, the learners furthest from opportunity. So as you're designing efficacy studies, as you're measuring whether or not the things that you're doing are working, as you're drawing from research, there are some research traditions that think about students universally in the aggregate, and others who think about, in particular, what seem to be strategies that benefit the most vulnerable learners in society. So that's one orientation that anyone, in the product development chain can be thinking about. A second strategy that we started to encourage people to think about is think about a whole product life cycle. Think about pulling a team together around a new idea, building a team to start creating something, thinking about how it's funding, putting the first prototypes in the field, evaluating those prototypes, sort of scaling things up so it can be more widely distributed, evaluating how well it's working, thinking about how it collects data and processes it. Think about at each of those design steps, asking the question, how could we support and sustain equity, at this step? So in the very earliest stages, people can look around the room and be like, do we have folks here who represent the voices of our most vulnerable learners? Like, do some of us who are developing this, do we feel like we come from communities that we most hope to serve with this product? If not, are there ways that we can have design advisory boards, or when we're doing our earliest prototyping, are we taking things into the sort of easiest classrooms to get to? Or are we being intentional about, okay, have we tried this in a rural classroom? Have we tried this, in an extremely segregated urban environment? Have we tried this in other places? I would think, as we're collecting data, like, do we know that we can collect data about different subgroups so we can figure out whether or not it's working in different contexts? But I think that lens of, you all in McGraw-Hill Education, you probably have some way of segmenting, what that life cycle is and have your own internal names for it. But it would be interesting to think about, like, what would be 3 questions that you would want, every project manager, every team member in each of those sections to be thinking about. I think that's part of one way of addressing these challenges, is to just try to make it a more sort of central part of the cultural conversations that happens inside organizations. That if it just becomes increasingly normal to say, of course you want to make something that's really good. Of course you want to make something that's going to be so compelling that lots of people are going to want to purchase it from lots of different schools and districts. But then also this question of, how is this going to serve the students furthest from opportunity? Have we really thought about that? And, and I think that, just like we've, when we targeted more around learning differences and had conversations about universal design for learning and things like that, one of the things we discovered is that when you serve students on the margins, you often end up building things that are just better for everyone.